At the end of the 9th century BCE, about 2,800 years ago, an Aramean army attacked Gath, one of the 5 Philistine cities mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. The outcome of this event, which was clearly memorized by the biblical authors, was the complete destruction of the settlement. But what did the Arameans do in Philistia from the very beginning? Why did they attack Philistine Gath? And how does this event relate to the biblical references concerning the wars against the Kingdom of Israel? In order to answer these questions, or for the very least to offer some possible narratives, it is necessary to examine some of the textual and archaeological evidence for the wars of Aram-Damascus against Israel and its neighbors in the 9th century BCE. Generally speaking, the territorial expansion of Aram-Damascus in this period can be reconstructed according to 3 different sources. The first source is the Hebrew Bible, where the violent nature of the destruction of the Israelite cities by the Arameans, and moreover, their evil actions towards the local populations are frequently mentioned. A particularly vivid portrayal of the events is offered, for instance, by the prophetic stories in 2 Kings 8, which make a reference to a dynastic shift in Aram-Damascus, but also mention the burning of the Israelite fortresses. The second source, discovered in the early 90s at Tel Dan. During the excavation of this site, a royal inscription written in Aramaic was discovered. Exceptionally, this source brings the perspective of the king of Aram-Damascus on the events. The anonymous author, almost certainly Hazael of Damascus, mentioned, among other things, the conflicts with the Kingdom of Israel, and that it was the Israelite king that attacked him first. The first source is the archaeological record, an extensive source that has the potential to shed new light on the events associated with the conflicts between Israel and Aram-Damascus. The data from the field provide essential details concerning the length and nature of the historical processes, and especially an opportunity to examine whether the territorial expansion of Aram-Damascus at that time was indeed as violent as described in the biblical materials. We can also add to these 3 sources additional extra-biblical texts, such as the royal annals of Shalmaneser III, the king of Assyria in the mid-9th century BCE, or a small group of inscribed ivory objects bearing the name of Hazael. All of them disclose the prominent status of Aram-Damascus in the ancient Near East, specifically during Hazael's reign. A combination of the data from all of the sources allow us now to reconstruct the territorial expansion of Aram-Damascus at that time in a more nuanced way. It seems that the conflicts between Israelites and Arameans began with the Battle of Ramoth Gilead, an important city in the northern Gilead, a distance of about 80 kilometers to the northeast of Samaria. As many scholars have argued in the past, the background for this clash was probably the death of the king of Aram-Damascus, Adad-Idri, known to us mainly from the Battle of Karkar, and the rise of Hazael, maybe one of his army generals. This incident provided Joram, the Israelite king, with the necessary justification for breaking the alliance between the 2 kingdoms, and for claiming territories in the northern Gilead, which at that time was apparently under a Damascene rule. Joram's move, however, turned out to be a substantial strategic mistake, as Aram-Damascus clearly defeated the Israelite army in the battle. And this may have even led to the death of Joram in Jezreel, either as a result of the fight or as the outcome of Yehu's revolt that broke out immediately afterwards. While the biblical text generally does not name the Israelite cities that were destroyed by the Arameans, excavations in several archaeological sites in northern Israel have revealed destruction layers that are dated to the second half of the 9th century BCE. Since the dating of these events fits nicely within Hazael's reign, and in light of biblical and extra-biblical sources, it was suggested to understand them against the background of the conflicts between Aram-Damascus and Israel. Among the settlements that suffered traumatic events in this period were cities like Hatzor, Rehov, and Megiddo. One point must be stressed, however, here. In contrast to the image portrayed by the biblical authors, most of the Israelite towns were actually not razed to the ground, nor fiercely burned. This is particularly true in the case of Hatzor, which during the 10th and 9th century BCE was a fortified stronghold in the Hula Valley, facing Aram-Damascus. This may suggest that the Arameans intended to reuse the conquered cities and therefore preferred not to raze them to the ground. Extensive building projects documented in the Hula Valley after the destruction wave, for example at Hatzor, are clear support in favor of such a scenario. And of course, every rule has an exception. Archaeology shows that in contrast to the modest destructions observed elsewhere in the Northern Kingdom, settlements at the Bet Shean Valley actually fell victim to very violent attacks by the Arameans. This was especially apparent at Tel Rehov, which at that time was one of the largest cities of the Northern Kingdom. Excavation at this site demonstrate that the city was severely destroyed in the second half of the 9th century. One possible explanation is that the total demolition of these cities and other towns in its vicinity was the result of it being the hometown of Yehu, the Israelite king, or the territories of his clan, as suggested by several inscriptions found in this region, bearing the name of Nimshi, mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as Yehu's father and grandfather. Following the defeat of the Northern Kingdom, Hazael conducted one or more military campaigns to the southern districts of Canaan, resulting in the violent destruction of Philistine Gath. As already mentioned, memory of this event was preserved in the Hebrew Bible. Indeed, the long-term excavation of Tel Esafi have revealed an extensive destruction layer which was even radiocarbon dated to the second half of the 9th century BCE. Moreover, soundings along the fringes of the mound unearthed unique evidence for a moat-like feature, which was understood as evidence for an advanced siege system excavated by the Arameans. And yet, and despite our growing knowledge concerning the actions of the Arameans in the south, we must admit that the historical background for Hazael's campaign against Gath is still somewhat enigmatic. On the one hand, it is very reasonable to connect this event to the attempt of Aram-Damascus to achieve greater control over the Southern Levantine polities and to eliminate rival kingdoms that might threaten it, particularly in light of the renewal of the Assyrian campaigns to the west towards the end of Hazael's reign. On the other hand, several scholars have speculated in the last few years that Hazael's southern campaigns should actually be linked to the prospering copper industry of the Arava Valley, about 125 kilometers to the southeast of Gath. According to this theory, Hazael attempted to monopolize the copper trade in the Levant and therefore destroyed Gath, which functioned as a key node in the commercial network, monitoring the transformation of raw materials from the desert to the coast. Beyond Gath, we can mention another interesting issue related to Hazael's campaign to the south, its impact on the kingdom of Judah. In the Hebrew Bible, the authors describe how following the destruction of Philistine Gath, Hazael turned to conquer Jerusalem, but was specified by the offerings suggested to him by Joash. In this case, the archaeological evidence from settlement located to the south of Nahal Guvrin and the Beersheba Arad Valley territories that are usually assumed to be controlled by the Kingdom of Judah aligned well with the biblical accounts, which describe, as mentioned, a quick submission to the Arameans rather than severe destruction of the local towns. If to summarize, the Damascene takeover of the Southern Levant, including its wars against Israel and other nearby polities, was a slow and rather calculated process, very different from the biblical descriptions which may have exaggerated the nature of the events. Given the extensive territories taken by the Arameans during that time, it is reasonable to assume that the military campaigns against the Kingdom of Israel were deployed over at least several years, if not more than a decade. At the end of the 9th century, maybe towards the end of Hazael's reign, Aram-Damascus executed at least one more military campaign to Philistia. A comparison of the abandonment mechanism of Philistine and Judean settlements reveals the diverse impacts of Hazael's campaign on the region and attests once again to the well-planned and structured policy taken by the Arameans. It also supports the idea that Hazael intended to establish permanent hegemony over the neighboring states of Aram-Damascus, a wish that was not fulfilled due to his death and the renewal of the Assyrian military campaigns to the west in the days of Adad-Nirari III. Thank you.